Eduardo's heart pounded against his ribs as he stared at the Chinese characters that would bankrupt the company where he silently mopped floors each night. In that frozen moment between invisibility and recognition, he faced the most terrifying decision of his life: remain silent and safe, or speak up and risk everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Eduardo Navarro wasn't supposed to be in the executive boardroom that night. As the head of the night cleaning crew at Daystar Global, his routine was methodical: vacuum the main floor offices, empty trash bins, and save the executive suite for last when all the suits had cleared out. Tonight, though, the C-suite lights still burned well past 10, unusual even for quarter end. He moved quietly around the perimeter, emptying small bins while trying to remain invisible to the harried executives circling the gleaming conference table. They barely registered his presence, their attention fixed on the screens displaying the final contract language for the Zhang acquisition, a $100 million deal that would either cement Daystar's international expansion or become CEO Alicia Montero's most public failure. "We need these final approvals tonight if we want to announce at tomorrow's opening bell," Alicia snapped, her tailored blazer showing not a single wrinkle despite the 14-hour day. "The translation team has confirmed everything is aligned with our initial term sheet." Eduardo kept his eyes down as he moved behind her chair. He'd learned long ago that making eye contact with executives often made them uncomfortable, as if suddenly remembering there was a human being emptying their trash. The boardroom table was littered with half-empty coffee cups and crumpled energy bar wrappers, evidence of the marathon session. "Legals satisfied with the Chinese version?" asked the CFO, scrolling through pages on his tablet. "Fully vetted," Alicia confirmed. "Translation team says it's word perfect." Eduardo froze midway through collecting a coffee cup. Word perfect. The phrase sent a jolt through him. He risked a glance at the screen where the Chinese contract was displayed alongside its English counterpart. Something about the character sequence in section 3.4 looked wrong. Before immigrating to America, Eduardo had been a professor of comparative linguistics at the University of Madrid, specializing in East Asian languages. That life seemed impossibly distant now, washed away by a series of misfortunes that began with his wife's cancer diagnosis and ended with him raising their daughter Lucia alone while cleaning offices at night. A job that required no English credentials, just a strong back and invisibility. He hesitated, weighing professional survival against professional integrity. He'd learned that America had little use for foreign credentials without the proper connections and perfect English, especially from a middle-aged immigrant with a heavy accent. Eduardo continued around the table, collecting trash while stealing glances at the document. Each look confirmed his suspicion. The translation wasn't just imperfect, it contained a critical error that fundamentally altered the payment structure. In the Chinese version, Daystar would be obligated to release the full $100 million upon regulatory approval, not in the structured installments clearly outlined in the English version. It was the kind of mistake that could bankrupt the company. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for another cup. The executives were wrapping up, gathering their things. The moment of opportunity was closing. "We'll reconvene at 7 tomorrow for final signatures," Alicia announced, sliding her tablet into a leather portfolio. "The Zhang team lands at 6. Eduardo made a decision. Heart pounding, he stepped forward just as they began to disperse. "Excuse me, Mrs. Montero." The room went silent. 7 executives turned to stare at him as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. "Yes," Alicia's tone was polite but carried a clear undercurrent of impatience. "There is a," he struggled for the word in English, "discrepancy in the translation. Section 3.4, about the payment schedule." The CFO laughed, a short bark. "The cleaning staff is vetting our contracts now." Eduardo flushed, but held his ground. The Chinese text does not match the English. It says full payment upon regulatory approval, not installments. Alicia's expression shifted from annoyance to sharp attention. "How would you know that? I was a linguistics professor before coming to America. Chinese was one of my specialties." The room's atmosphere changed instantly. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. "Davis," Pull up 3.4. Alicia commanded the legal counsel. She turned back to Eduardo. Show me. Swallowing hard, Eduardo approached the screen and pointed to the problematic characters, explaining the subtle but critical distinction. As he spoke, the tension in the room became palpable. Davis's face drained of color. He's right, the lawyer finally said. This doesn't match our English version. The translation team completely missed the conditionality structure. Jesus Christ, the CFO muttered. Oh, did we nearly handed them 100 million up front? Alicia stared at Eduardo, her expression unreadable. What's your name? Eduardo Navarro, ma'am. Mr. Navarro, would you mind waiting outside for a moment? He nodded and stepped out, heart still racing. Through the glass walls, he could see them huddled in intense discussion, occasionally glancing his way. After 15 agonizing minutes, during which he contemplated the very real possibility of being fired for overstepping, Alicia emerged alone. How many languages do you speak, Mr. Navarro? 5 fluently, 3 more conversationally, he answered. She nodded slowly. And you're working as a janitor? It wasn't a question, but Eduardo felt compelled to explain. My credentials, they don't transfer easily. And after my wife died, I needed steady work with health insurance for my daughter. Something softened in Alicia's expression. You just saved this company from a catastrophic error that our entire legal and translation teams missed. An error that would have cost us 100 million. She paused. I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. Bring your resume, whatever you have, and any documentation of your credentials, even if they're from overseas. Eduardo stared at her, uncertain. Am I being fired? Alicia actually laughed, a genuine sound of surprise. Fired? Mr. Navarro, I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do yet, but firing the man who just saved us from a $100 million mistake is definitely not on the table. As she walked away, Eduardo stood frozen in the hallway, his cleaning cart forgotten beside him. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope. Eduardo couldn't sleep that night. He sat at the small kitchen table in his 2-bedroom apartment, nursing a cup of tea and staring at the worn leather folder that contained his academic credentials. The embossed seal of the University of Madrid had faded, much like his former identity. He traced the outline with his fingertip, remembering the day he'd received his doctorate, how his parents had beamed with pride. Dad, what are you doing up? Lucia stood in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep. At 16, she was the spitting image of her mother, the same intelligent eyes and determined chin. Just thinking, Mija, go back to bed. She ignored him, padding to the refrigerator in her worn pajamas. You're looking at your professor stuff. You never do that anymore. Eduardo sighed. His daughter knew him too well. Something happened at work today. At the cleaning job, she poured herself a glass of water, eyeing him curiously. Yes, he hesitated, then explained what had transpired in the boardroom. Lucia's eyes widened as he spoke, a spark of pride igniting in them. Dad, that's amazing. They finally know how smart you are. She sat across from him, suddenly animated. This could change everything for us. Lucia, don't get your hopes up. The CEO just wants to talk. It might be nothing. It's not nothing, she insisted. You always tell me education matters, that knowledge is power. Well, your knowledge just saved a huge company millions of dollars. Eduardo smiled despite himself. Her optimism was infectious, a quality she'd somehow maintained despite everything they'd been through. We'll see what happens tomorrow. For now, bed. You have school. After she reluctantly returned to her room, Eduardo opened his laptop. He spent the next 3 hours updating his resume, translating his academic papers into English, and researching Alicia Montero. The more he learned about Daystar's CEO, the more intrigued he became. She'd risen through the ranks in just 8 years, transforming the mid-sized technology company into an international player. Articles described her as brilliant, demanding, and unexpectedly progressive in her approach to talent. By dawn, Eduardo had assembled what he could of his professional life. The life before grief and immigration had reshaped his existence. It wasn't much, but it was authentic. He showered, shaved carefully, and put on his only suit, purchased years ago for job interviews that had led nowhere. It hung looser now, his frame thinned by years of physical labor. Lucia whistled when she saw him at breakfast. Professor Navarro returns. He rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. Remember, this might just be a thank you and nothing more. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you, she said, suddenly serious. Mum would be too. Those words carried him through his bus ride to Daystar headquarters. The morning sunlight gleamed off the glass tower, making it shimmer like a mirage. Eduardo clutched his worn leather portfolio and took a deep breath before approaching the security desk. I have an appointment with Ms. Montero, Eduardo Navarro. The guard looked surprised. Janitorial staff rarely entered through the main lobby, let alone had meetings with the CEO. ID, please. After calling upstairs for confirmation, the guard handed Eduardo a visitor badge. Executive elevators, 40th floor. The elevator was silent and swift, its polished surfaces reflecting Eduardo's nervous expression. When the doors opened, he stepped into a realm he normally only saw after its occupants had departed, the executive floor gleaming with morning light, rather than the dim evening illumination he was accustomed to. Mr. Navarro, a poised young woman greeted him. I'm Tessa, Mrs. Montero's executive assistant. She's expecting you. Tessa led him past curious glances from staff who clearly recognized him from his night duties, but seemed confused by his daytime appearance in a suit. Eduardo kept his eyes forward, dignity wrapped around him like armor. Alicia's office was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She rose from behind her desk when he entered, looking fresh and commanding in a tailored cream blazer, nothing like someone who had been working until nearly midnight. Mr. Navarro, thank you for coming. She gestured to a seating area rather than keeping the desk between them. Coffee? Yes. Thank you. His voice sounded stiff, even to his own ears. As Tessa arranged coffee service, Eduardo noticed others filing into the office. The CFO from last night, the head of legal, and a woman he didn't recognize. I hope you don't mind that I've asked some colleagues to join us, Alicia said, noting his expression. After what happened last night, I wanted to approach this conversation comprehensively. Eduardo nodded, his mouth suddenly dry despite the coffee. Was this an inquisition? Perhaps they suspected he had been spying, looking at confidential documents during his cleaning duties. Allow me to introduce Regina Patel, our Chief People Officer, Alicia continued, gesturing to the woman Eduardo didn't recognize. After our conversation last night, I asked her to join us. Once everyone was seated, Alicia got straight to the point. Mr. Navarro, your intervention last night potentially saved this company $100 million and possibly our entire expansion into the Chinese market. Our legal team spent the night verifying your identification of the translation error and found you were absolutely correct. The head of legal, Davis, looked simultaneously sheepish and impressed. The translation firm we contracted has acknowledged the error. They're conducting an internal review, but the bottom line is you caught something our entire professional team missed, which raises some obvious question, Alicia continued. You mentioned you were a linguistics professor. I'd like to understand more about your background. Eduardo carefully opened his portfolio and handed her his credential. I was a tenured professor of comparative linguistics at the University of Madrid, specializing in East Asian languages. I published extensively on Mandarin Chinese dialectical variations and their implications for international business communications. The executives exchanged glances as Alicia examined his documents. When my wife was diagnosed with cancer, we moved to America for treatment at Johns Hopkins. After she passed, I remained here with our daughter, but he paused, the familiar shame washing over him. My credentials weren't recognized without additional American certifications. The medical bills had depleted our savings, and I needed immediate work with health benefits. Regina Patel leaned forward. So you took a job as a janitor despite having a PhD and speaking 8 languages? Eduardo met her eyes steadily. I did what was necessary for my daughter. A moment of silence followed. Alicia handed his credentials to Regina, who who examined them with interest. "Mr. Navarro," Alicia finally said, "I believe Daystar has been unknowingly squandering an extraordinary resource by having you clean our offices instead of working with our international teams." Eduardo blinked, uncertain he'd heard correctly. "I've spent the morning speaking with our board," she continued. "We'd like to offer you a position as special advisor to our international acquisitions team, with particular focus on linguistic and cultural verification of our translation processes." The CFO nodded. "After last night, it's clear we need someone with your expertise reviewing our international contracts before they're finalized. The salary would be $175,000 annually, with full benefits, of course," Regina added. "We'd also provide resources for you to update any credentials should you wish to pursue that." Eduardo sat perfectly still, certain he had misunderstood. "I'm sorry. Are you offering me a job? A different job?" "We are," Alicia confirmed. "Though I should be clear, this isn't charity or merely gratitude for last night. This is Daystar recognizing talent and expertise we need. Your academic background combined with your practical knowledge of multiple languages makes you uniquely qualified." Eduardo's mind raced. The salary they mentioned was more than 6 times what he currently earned. It would mean Lucia could apply to any college without financial concerns. It would mean a new apartment, perhaps even in a neighborhood with better schools. It would mean reclaiming part of his former identity. I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Say yeah," Alicia suggested with a small smile. "And then help us fix our international communications processes so we never come this close to disaster again." Eduardo stood in the elevator, his hand gripping the support rail as the floors ticked by. He'd said yes to Alicia's offer, how could he not? But now, riding down to the ground floor, reality was setting in. Tonight would have been his regular shift, mopping floors and emptying trash. Instead, he'd be returning home to tell Lucia their lives were about to change. The doors opened and he stepped into the lobby, still dazed. He barely noticed the security guard's curious look as he handed back his visitor badge. Outside, the spring air felt different somehow, lighter, full of possibility. Eduardo sat on a bench in the small plaza outside Daystar's headquarters, needing a moment to process what had just happened. He pulled out his phone and stared at it, his thumb hovering over Lucia's contact. This wasn't news to deliver via text. He'd tell her in person. His phone buzzed with an incoming email from Regina Patel. Subject line: "Welcome to Daystar. Next steps." It contained HR paperwork, a tentative schedule for his first week, and a note that he could start in 2 weeks to allow for proper transition from his current role. 2 weeks. After 5 years of night shifts and invisibility, in 14 days he would walk through the front doors of Daystar as Eduardo Navarro, PhD, Special Advisor to International Acquisitions. "Mr. Navarro?" He looked up to find Alicia Montero standing before him, her cream blazer gleaming in the sunlight. "Miss Montero," he stammered, quickly rising to his feet. "Please, sit. I'm on my way to a meeting but saw you here." She sat beside him on the bench, maintaining a professional distance. "I wanted to check if you had any immediate concerns about the offer." "No, it's more than generous. I'm just," he searched for the right words, "adjusting to the suddenness of it all." Alicia nodded. "I understand. Change, even positive change, can be disorienting." She studied him for a moment. There's something else I wanted to discuss. After our meeting, I had a thought. The Zhang team is arriving this evening for tomorrow's signing. We've corrected the contract error, but I'm concerned about potential communication issues during the face-to-face negotiation." Eduardo understood immediately. "You want me to attend the meeting? If you're willing, not as a janitor, but as our linguistic consultant. Your insights could be invaluable, especially given what we now know about the translation firm's limitations." She paused. "It would mean starting immediately rather than in 2 weeks." His mind raced. "I'd need to arrange alternative coverage for my shift tonight." "Already handled," Alicia replied. "I spoke with your supervisor. You're officially on leave from janitorial services as of now." Eduardo felt a mixture of gratitude and unease at how quickly she had moved. This woman operated at a pace he'd forgotten existed in the professional world. "Then yes, I'd be honored to attend. Excellent. She handed him a business card. My personal number is on the back. The meeting is at 7 tonight. Business attire. Her eyes briefly took in his slightly outdated suit. If you need anything for the meeting, consider it a company expense. Tessa can help with reimbursement. Before he could respond, she was up and walking toward a waiting town car, phone already at her ear. Eduardo looked down at the card in his hand. In a span of 12 hours, he'd gone from invisibly cleaning the boardroom to being invited to sit at the table. He slipped the card into his pocket and headed for the bus stop, his mind already planning the conversation with Lucia and what he would need for tonight's meeting. The apartment was empty when Eduardo arrived home. Lucia was still at school. He hung his suit carefully in the closet and sat at his computer, researching everything he could find about the Zhang deal and the principles involved. He refreshed his knowledge of business Mandarin, focusing on the financial and legal terminology that might arise. By the time Lucia's key turned in the lock, Eduardo had filled pages of notes. "Dad, why are you home so early?" Lucia dropped her backpack by the door. "Are you sick?" "No, Mija, I have new." He gestured for her to sit. As he recounted the morning's events, Lucia's expression transformed from concern to disbelief to elation. $175,000 a year, she squealed, jumping up to hug him. "Dad, that's life-changing." "It is," he agreed, hugging her back. "And there's more. I'm attending an important meeting tonight with the CEO." Lucia pulled back, her eyes wide. "Tonight?" But she glanced at his worn suit hanging on the closet door. "I know. I need to go shopping." An hour later, they were at the mall, a rare excursion typically reserved for absolute necessities. Lucia, suddenly the fashion expert, guided him through department stores with authority. "You need something that says, 'I belong at that table,'" she insisted, selecting a charcoal gray suit with subtle blue undertones. "This will make your eyes stand out." Eduardo balked at the price tag, but Lucia reminded him of Alicia's words about company expenses. They added a crisp white shirt, a burgundy tie, and new shoes. At the register, Eduardo hesitated before handing over his credit card, the balance of which he usually kept low for emergencies. "It's an investment, Dad," Lucia said softly. "In your future. In our future." Back at home, Eduardo showered and dressed with care. The new suit fit perfectly, transforming his appearance from tired night janitor to polished professional. When he emerged from his bedroom, Lucia gasped. "Dad, you look important," he smiled, adjusting his tie nervously. "Let's hope the Zhang team thinks so too." "Wait." Lucia disappeared into her room and returned with a small box. "Mom would want you to have this tonight." Inside was his old tie clip, a silver bar engraved with his initials that his wife had given him when he received tenure. Eduardo had pawned most of their valuables during her illness, but Lucia had somehow salvaged this. "I've been saving it," she said simply. Eduardo's throat tightened as he clipped it to his tie. "Thank you, Mija." She hugged him fiercely. "Go show them who you really are." Daystar's headquarters looked different in the evening golden hour, its glass facade reflecting the sunset in shades of amber and rose. Eduardo approached the security desk with his temporary badge from the morning, feeling both foreign and familiar in these surroundings. "Mr. Navarro," the guard greeted him, a different one from the morning shift. "Miss Montero's team is expecting you. 40th floor, boardroom A." In the elevator, Eduardo straightened his tie and took a deep breath. The doors opened directly into the executive reception area, where Tessa waited. "Right on time," she smiled, leading him toward the boardroom. "They're just getting settled. The Zhang team arrived 20 minutes ago." Through the glass walls, Eduardo could see Alicia standing at the head of the table, flanked by her executive team. Across from them sat 4 Chinese businessmen in impeccable suits, flanked by their own entourage of assistants and translators. Tessa opened the door, and conversations paused as heads turned toward Eduardo. For a moment, he saw confusion in the eyes of some Daystar executives who recognized him from his night duties, but Alicia stepped forward smoothly. "Ah, here he is," she announced. "Gentlemen, Allow me to introduce Dr. Eduardo Navarro, our special advisor on international linguistics and cultural affairs. Eduardo stepped forward, the title unfamiliar but not unwelcome. He bowed slightly to the Chinese delegation and addressed them in perfect Mandarin. It is my honor to meet such distinguished representatives. I hope our discussions tonight will lead to a partnership beneficial to all. The surprise on the faces of the Zhang team quickly gave way to pleased smiles. The eldest member, clearly the leader, responded warmly in Mandarin, complimenting Eduardo's excellent pronunciation and formal address. Alicia watched this exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. She gestured Eduardo to an empty seat on her side of the table, a seat that hadn't been there that morning when he was emptying trash bins. As Eduardo settled in, he caught the CFO staring at him with undisguised amazement. The transformation from invisible service worker to respected advisor was complete, at least in appearance. Now he had to prove it was justified. Shall we begin? Alicia suggested, switching to English. Dr. Navarro will assist with any translation clarifications to ensure perfect understanding on both sides. For the next hour, Eduardo listened intently as the teams discussed final terms. When the controversial section about payment schedules arose, he leaned forward, explaining in both languages the exact nature of the previous error and the corrected terms. His academic knowledge of business language nuances allowed him to bridge subtleties that the official translators missed. Mr. Zhang, the delegation head, studied Eduardo with growing respect. During a brief break, he approached Eduardo while others helped themselves to refreshments. "Your Mandarin is exceptional, Dr. Navarro," he said in his native tongue. May I ask where you studied?" "Beijing Language and Culture University, sir, for 2 years during my doctoral work. Then later at Shanghai International Studies University as a visiting professor." Mr. Zhang nodded approvingly. "And how long have you been with Daystar?" Eduardo hesitated, unsure how to answer. Across the room, he caught Alicia watching the exchange, her expression unreadable. My formal role as linguistic advisor began very recently," he answered carefully. "But I've been observing Daystar's operations for some time." Mr. Zhang seemed to appreciate Eduardo's diplomatic response. He smiled slightly, raising his teacup in acknowledgement before returning to his delegation. As soon as he departed, Alicia approached, smoothly inserting herself into the space he'd vacated. "You're doing remarkably well," she said in a low voice. "The Zhang team is responding to you far better than to our official translators." "Thank you," Eduardo replied, fighting the surreal feeling of standing in this room as a peer rather than an after-hours shadow. Mr. Zhang seems pleased with the revised contract terms. He should be. We're still offering an extremely favorable deal, despite correcting the payment structure. Alicia glanced at her watch. "We'll reconvene in 5 minutes to finalize the discussions. I'd like you to sit directly across from Mr. Zhang for the remainder." Eduardo nodded, trying to appear unruffled by the increasing prominence of his role. As Alicia turned to speak with her CFO, Davis, the legal counsel, approached. "Dr. Navarro," he began, the new title rolling awkwardly off his tongue. "I wanted to personally thank you for catching our error. That kind of mistake could have ended several careers, mine included." Eduardo noted the genuine relief in the man's eyes. "It was fortunate I happened to see it." "More than fortunate," Davis countered. "It was a genuine linguistic insight our translation team completely missed. I've been reviewing your credential. Your papers on contractual language variations across Chinese dialects are directly applicable to our work." Eduardo blinked in surprise. "You've read my academic work?" "Since this morning," Davis confirmed. "Miss Montero had your publications pulled and distributed to the executive team. Your analysis of linguistic ambiguities in Sino-Western business agreements is frankly revolutionary." Before Eduardo could process this revelation that his academic work, largely forgotten in the years of survival-focused existence, had been circulated among Daystar's leadership, Tessa signaled for everyone to return to their seats. As directed, Eduardo found himself positioned directly across from Mr. Zhang, with the other Daystar executives flanking him. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Eduardo had been placed in a position of prominence, a direct cultural and linguistic bridge between the two companies. The discussions resumed with a new dynamic. When complex terms arose, the Chinese delegation increasingly directed their questions to Eduardo rather than to their own translators. He responded carefully, maintaining professional neutrality while ensuring both sides fully understood each point of agreement. During one particularly nuanced discussion about intellectual property protections, Eduardo noticed Mr. Zhang's lead counsel using subtly different terminology in Mandarin than what appeared in the written agreement. He politely interrupted. "If I may," he said in Mandarin, "there seems to be a distinction between the written terms regarding technology transfer limitations and how we're discussing them verbally." The counsel looked momentarily surprised, then appreciative. "You have an excellent ear, Dr. Navarro. Yes, the written terms are slightly more restrictive than our verbal understanding." Eduardo translated this exchange into English for the Daystar team, adding, "This is a cultural approach where some flexibility is expected beyond the strict written terms. However, for legal clarity, I suggest we revise the written language to match our verbal understanding exactly." Alicia nodded. "Absolutely. Davis, please note the revision." By the time the 3-hour meeting concluded, the atmosphere had transformed from cautious negotiation to genuine partnership. The Zhang team stood to leave, with final signatures scheduled for the following morning. Mr. Zhang approached Eduardo direct. "Dr. Navarro, your assistance tonight has been invaluable. I wonder if you might join us for breakfast tomorrow before the signing. There are cultural matters I'd like to discuss." Eduardo glanced at Alicia, who gave a subtle nod. "I would be honored," he replied. After the Chinese delegation departed, Alicia gathered her team. "Outstanding work, everyone, particularly you, Dr. Navarro. You've proven your value in ways I couldn't have anticipated this morning." The CFO laughed. Talk about a rapid promotion, from cleaning the boardroom to saving our biggest deal in a single day. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Eduardo tensed, feeling suddenly exposed. His former role, so recently shed, had been directly referenced. Alicia's expression hardened slightly. "James, Dr. Navarro's previous position at Daystar is irrelevant to his current contributions. His expertise speaks for itself." The CFO flushed. "Of course, no offense intended. It's just remarkable." "Indeed it is," Alicia agreed, the tension dissolving. "Now everyone get some rest. Tomorrow we make history." As the team dispersed, she motioned for Eduardo to stay. A word. When they were alone, Alicia's professional facade softened slightly. "You handled yourself exceptionally well tonight. Far better than I had any right to expect on your first day. Thank you for the opportunity," Eduardo replied sincerely. "It feels good to use these skills again. About tomorrow's breakfast with Mr. Zhang, it's an honor. He rarely requests personal meetings, especially with non-executives. Do you know what he wants to discuss?" Alicia smiled. "My guess, he's impressed and curious about you. A Western academic with perfect Mandarin, who understands the cultural nuances of business negotiation, is rare. Be prepared for personal question." Eduardo nodded, both flattered and anxious. "One more thing," Alicia continued. "I've approved an advance on your first paycheck. Tessa will have it for you on your way out, for any additional expenses you might incur preparing for tomorrow." The thoughtfulness of this gesture caught Eduardo off guard. "That's very kind, but not necessary." "It's not kindness, it's practicality," Alicia replied briskly, her CEO demeanor returning. "Daystar needs you at your best for this deal. Consider it an investment in our success." As Eduardo left the building, advance check in hand, the night air felt crisp with possibility. He checked his watch. Nearly midnight. Lucia would be waiting up, despite his texts telling her to sleep. He smiled at the thought of her eager questions, her pride in his new role. The bus stop was deserted at this hour. As he waited, Eduardo's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Well done tonight. Breakfast is at 7:30, Peninsula Hotel. Car will pick you up at 6:45. Empress Alicia Montero." Eduardo saved the number, still marveling at how completely his life had changed in less than 24 hours. The car arrived precisely at 6:45 the next morning, a sleek black sedan, with a uniformed driver who addressed him as Dr. Navarro Without a hint of surprise or confusion, Eduardo settled into the leather back seat, adjusting his new tie, purchased last night with part of the advance. Lucia had insisted on this final shopping trip, selecting a subtle pattern that she declared power tie material. The Peninsula Hotel embodied old-world luxury, its lobby gleaming with marble and brass. Eduardo was escorted to a private dining room where Mr. Zhang waited alone, a pot of tea steaming between two place settings. Dr. Navarro, the older man, greeted him warmly, rising to shake hands. "Thank you for joining me." "The honor is mine," Eduardo replied in Mandarin, bowing slightly before taking his seat. Mr. Zhang poured tea for both of them, observing the traditional courtesies before speaking. "I hope you'll forgive my curiosity, but your presence at yesterday's meeting was unexpected." Eduardo sipped his tea, considering his response. "In what way? A linguistics expert of your caliber suddenly appearing at such a critical moment?" Mr. Zhang's eyes twinkled. It seemed almost too fortunate for Daystar. Eduardo recognized the implied question. Was he brought in specifically to gain advantage in the negotiations? Honesty seemed the best approach. "My involvement was indeed recent and unexpected," he acknowledged. "Until yesterday, I served in a different capacity at Daystar." Mr. Zhang nodded thoughtfully. "And now you advise the CEO directly on matters of international linguistics, a substantial change. Life often changes suddenly," Eduardo replied, "as I'm sure you know from your own experience." The older man smiled appreciatively at the diplomatic response. "Indeed, my first job was loading cargo ships at Shanghai Harbor. Now I signed papers to buy those ships." He studied Eduardo carefully. "May I ask what brought someone with your academic credentials to America?" Over the next hour, as breakfast was served, Eduardo shared a carefully edited version of his story: his wife's illness, their move to America, the challenges after her death. He omitted the specific details of his janitorial role, focusing instead on the difficulties of credential recognition and his dedication to his daughter. Mr. Zhang listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed his genuine interest. When Eduardo finished, the businessman nodded slowly. "A remarkable journey, and now a remarkable opportunity." "Yes," Eduardo agreed. "One I never expected. Ms. Montero strikes me as someone who recognizes value where others miss it," Mr. Zhang observed, "a rare quality in business leaders. She has been exceptionally perceptive," Eduardo said carefully. Mr. Zhang smiled. "As have you, Dr. Navarro. Your insights yesterday potentially saved both our companies from future disputes." He set down his teacup with finality. "Indeed, I look forward to working with you as our partnership develops." The meeting concluded with warm handshake. As Eduardo was escorted back to the waiting car, he felt a new sense of professional confidence he hadn't experienced in years. Mr. Zhang had treated him as an equal, a respected academic and business advisor, not a desperate immigrant who had been mopping floors just days ago. The contract signing ceremony proceeded flawlessly later that morning. Eduardo sat beside Alicia as pens scratched across paper and handshakes sealed the historic partnership. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for Daystar's press release, and in several shots, Eduardo appeared just behind Alicia's right shoulder, his presence now firmly established among the company's leadership. As the Zhang delegation departed, Alicia turned to her team. "Congratulations, everyone. Now the real work begins." She glanced at Eduardo. "Dr. Navarro, I'd like you to join the executive meeting this afternoon. 3 o'clock, my office." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind. Eduardo settled into his new role with a mixture of excitement and lingering disbelief. Daystar provided him with a spacious office on the 38th floor, 2 floors below the executive suite, but worlds away from the janitorial closet where he'd stored his cleaning supplies for 5 years. His first major task was a comprehensive audit of Daystar's international communication protocol. The translation error he'd caught wasn't an isolated incident. Eduardo quickly identified systemic weaknesses in how the company handled cross-cultural business dealings. "It's not just language," he explained to Alicia during their weekly check-in. "It's cultural context, regional business practices, and the subtleties of relationship building across borders. Alicia listened intently, occasionally making notes. What do you recommend? A complete overhaul. We need integrated teams with native speakers for each market. Regular cultural competency training for all international-facing staff, and a multi-layered review process for all contracts and communications. That sounds expensive and time-consuming, she observed, though without dismissal in her tone. Less expensive than a $100 million error, Eduardo replied with newfound confidence. Alicia smiled. Fair point. A draft, a formal proposal with budget estimates and implementation timeline. I'll present it to the board next month. When Eduardo arrived home that evening, Lucia was waiting with college brochures spread across the kitchen table. They had moved to a new apartment in a better neighborhood, with 2 proper bedrooms and a small study where Eduardo could work from home when needed. Georgetown has an amazing international relations program, Lucia said, pushing a glossy viewbook toward him. And Johns Hopkins has global economics. Eduardo smiled, remembering how recently college had seemed an almost impossible dream. You have time to decide, Mija. You're just starting junior year. I know, but now we need to think bigger. Her enthusiasm was infectious. With your new job, I could actually apply to these schools without worrying about financial aid. Later that night, after Lucia had gone to bed, Eduardo sat in his study reviewing his proposal for Daystar's international communications overhaul. The document reflected not just his linguistic expertise, but his personal journey, the challenges of crossing cultural boundaries, the dangers of miscommunication, the value of truly understanding the perspectives of others. The board approved his proposal unanimously the following month. Eduardo was given a team of 8 specialists and a substantial budget to implement what Alicia now called the Navarro Protocol for International Business Communications. 6 months after the fateful night when Eduardo had stopped a $100 million mistake, Daystar's quarterly earnings call revealed the first tangible results of his work. The Zhang partnership was flourishing, with implementation ahead of schedule and costs under budget. More significantly, 3 new Asian market deals had been secured using Eduardo's enhanced protocols, each proceeding smoothly where previous attempts had stalled. Our international division saw 28% growth this quarter, Alicia announced to the assembled analysts and investors. A significant portion of that success can be attributed to our new approach to cross-cultural business communications, developed by Dr. Eduardo Navarro, our special advisor on international linguistics and cultural affairs. Eduardo, sitting among the executives for the first time during an earnings call, felt a surge of pride. His methodologies weren't just theoretical academic exercises anymore. They were driving real business results. After the call, Alicia pulled him aside. The board is impressed. Eduardo, very impressed. They've asked me to expand your role. Expand it how? He asked, curious. We're creating a new division, Global Cultural Strategy. I want you to lead it as Senior Vice President. Eduardo stared at her, momentarily speechless. That's a significant promotion. One you've earned, Alicia replied matter-of-factly. Your protocols have already prevented 2 potential contract disasters in the European market, and your team's work on the Brazilian expansion has accelerated our timeline by months. The promotion came with another substantial salary increase, a larger team, and a seat at the executive leadership table. Eduardo found himself in daily meetings with C-suite executives who, just months earlier, had barely noticed him as he emptied their trash bins. Most embraced him as a valuable colleague, impressed by his results and expertise. A few, however, viewed his meteoric rise with suspicion or resentment. James Hoffman, the CFO, who had awkwardly referenced Eduardo's former janitorial role, was the most openly skeptical. During a strategy meeting in Alicia's office, he challenged Eduardo directly. This new cultural assimilation approach for the Middle Eastern expansion is going to delay implementation by at least 3 months, he argued, tapping Eduardo's report. We can't afford that kind of timeline extension. Respectfully, we can't afford not to take that time, Eduardo countered. The Qatari business culture requires relationship building before transaction. Rushing would likely result in no deal at all. That's speculation, Hoffman insisted. We need concrete projections, not cultural theories. Alicia intervened before the debate escalated. James, Eduardo's cultural theories have already saved us millions and accelerated 3 major partnerships. I think he's earned some latitude. The exchange highlighted Eduardo's ongoing challenge, translating his academic and cultural knowledge into the hard numbers and definitive timelines that drove corporate decision-making. He needed to prove his value beyond the initial victory of catching the contract error. The opportunity came unexpectedly. During a routine review of pending international deals, Eduardo noticed patterns in how different regional Daystar teams approached negotiations. European teams focused on technical specifications and regulatory compliance. Asian teams emphasized relationship continuity and long-term planning. North American teams prioritized immediate financial terms. These varied approaches created inconsistencies that partners found confusing or concerning, especially global companies dealing with multiple Daystar divisions. Working late into the night for weeks, Eduardo developed what he called the Cultural Synchronization Framework, a revolutionary approach that maintained cultural authenticity while creating a consistent, recognizable Daystar negotiation experience worldwide. The framework wasn't just theoretical, it included specific procedural guidelines, communication templates, negotiation playbooks customized for each region, and extensive training module. Most importantly, it measured success not just in deals closed, but in relationship strength, implementation efficiency, and long-term partnership stability. When Eduardo presented it to Alicia, she immediately recognized its potential. And this goes beyond fixing our international communications, she said, studying the detailed implementation plan. This could fundamentally transform how we do business globally. That's the intention, Eduardo confirmed, but it will require buy-in from every division head, significant training investment, and at least a year for full implementation. Alicia didn't hesitate. Present it to the full executive team next week. If they approve, and I believe they will, this becomes our top strategic initiative for the next fiscal year. The presentation was scheduled for Monday morning. Eduardo spent the weekend fine-tuning his slides, practicing his delivery, and preparing for potential objections, particularly from Hoffman. Lucia helped, acting as his audience and offering surprisingly insightful feedback. "Your dad, you need to speak their language," she advised after a particularly technical explanation. Not Spanish or English, but executive language. Numbers, timelines, competitive advantage. Eduardo smiled at his daughter's wisdom. "When did you become a business expert?" "I've been reading your books," she admitted. "The ones about cross-cultural business communication. It's actually really interesting." Monday morning arrived with unexpected news. The company that had botched the Zhang contract translation, Global Language Partners, had gone bankrupt after losing several major clients following the Daystar incident. Their collapse created an immediate market opportunity for a new approach to international business communications. Eduardo incorporated this breaking news into his presentation, highlighting the market gap and Daystar's unique position to fill it. When he entered the boardroom Monday morning, every executive seat was filled. Alicia had invited not just the C-suite, but all division heads and regional directors, a clear signal of the presentation's importance. "Good morning," Eduardo began, his voice steady, despite the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "Listen, today I'm presenting what we're calling the Cultural Synchronization Framework, a comprehensive approach to global business communications that will transform how Daystar operates internationally." For the next 40 minutes, Eduardo outlined his vision with precision and passion. He presented hard data on recent successes using his protocols, concrete projections for implementation costs and timeline, and comparative analyses of competitors' approaches. Most powerfully, he shared specific examples of how miscommunications had previously cost Daystar opportunities, contrasting them with recent wins using his methodologies. The collapse of global language partners creates not just an internal opportunity, but a potential new revenue stream, he concluded. By packaging our framework as a consulting service, Daystar could establish itself as the gold standard for international business communication, generating additional revenue while strengthening our own global operations. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Alicia spoke. Questions for Dr. Navarro. James Hoffman leaned forward. The investment required is substantial. What's the projected ROI timeline? Eduardo was ready for this. Full ROI within 18 months. With measurable efficiency gains beginning in Q1, the consulting arm would become profitable by year 2, generating an estimated $30 million annually by year 3. Hoffman looked skeptical, but nodded. Other questions followed about implementation challenges, staffing requirements, competitive analysis. Eduardo addressed each with data-driven responses that reflected both his academic expertise and his newly developed business acumen. The final question came from Rajiv Mehta, head of Asian markets. Dr. Navarro, what makes you confident this framework will work across all cultural contexts? What works in China may not work in Brazil. Excellent question, Eduardo acknowledged. The framework isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a meta-methodology that identifies the cultural variables in each context and creates consistent processes for addressing them. It's designed to be adaptive while maintaining Daystar's core values and negotiation principles. As the meeting concluded, Alicia stood. Thank you, Eduardo. This is precisely the kind of innovative thinking Daystar needs. I'll be recommending full implementation to the board at tomorrow's meeting. As executives filed out, many stopped to congratulate Eduardo or ask follow-up questions. Even Hoffman gave a grudging nod of acknowledgement. The presentation had been a triumph, a complete validation of Eduardo's expertise and vision. That evening, he and Lucia celebrated with dinner at an upscale restaurant they could never have afforded 6 months earlier. Due to the cultural synchronization framework, Lucia toasted, raising her sparkling cider. To new beginnings, Eduardo replied, clinking his glass against hers. Dad, Lucia said after a moment, her expression turning serious, I'm really proud of you, not just for the job and the money, but for showing them who you really are. Eduardo reached across the table to squeeze her hand. I couldn't have done it without you, Mija. Your faith in me never wavered, even when mine did. The board approved Eduardo's proposal unanimously the next day. Implementation began immediately, with Eduardo assembling a cross-functional team drawn from every division. The initiative was officially named Project Synergy, a deliberately simple title for a complex undertaking that would touch every aspect of Daystar's international operation. Over the next 6 months, Eduardo's days became a blur of strategy sessions, training workshops, and international video conferences. He traveled to key Daystar offices worldwide, personally introducing the framework to regional teams and addressing their specific concerns. His fluency in multiple languages proved invaluable, allowing him to connect directly with employees at all levels without translation barriers. The early results exceeded even Eduardo's projections. The European division, historically Daystar's most challenging region for partnership retention, reported a 40% improvement in client satisfaction metrics. The Brazilian expansion, which Hoffman had feared would stall, actually accelerated, with local partners praising Daystar's cultural sensitivity and adaptability. Most significantly, when the quarterly earnings were announced, Daystar reported a 15% increase in international revenue, nearly double the projected growth. Alicia called Eduardo to her office after the earnings call. Congratulations, she said, gesturing for him to sit. The board is ecstatic. Your framework is delivering beyond expectations. Thank you, Eduardo replied. And the teams have embraced it remarkably well. Which brings me to my next question. Alicia leaned forward. What's next? Where do we take Project Synergy from here? Eduardo had been pondering this very question. I believe we're ready to launch the external consulting arm. There's significant market demand, especially after global language partners collapse. Several former clients have already approached me informally. Interesting, Alicia tapped her pen thoughtfully. You're proposing we package and sell our internal methodology to other companies, potentially including competitors. With limitations, Eduardo clarified. We would offer a version of the framework adapted for general use, retaining proprietary elements that give Daystar its competitive edge. The consulting service would focus on implementation training and cultural alignment, rather than strategic development. Alicia nodded slowly. Draft a business plan. If it's as thorough as your framework proposal, I think the board will be receptive. 3 weeks later, Daystar announced the formation of Synergy Solution, a wholly owned subsidiary offering comprehensive cross-cultural business communication consulting services. Eduardo was named president while retaining his SVP role at Daystar. The press release highlighted his unique background as a distinguished academic who had developed revolutionary business communication methodologies. The launch garnered unexpected media attention. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile titled "The Professor Who Transformed Daystar's Global Strategy." Fortune published an interview where Eduardo outlined his vision for international business communication. Harvard Business Review requested an article detailing the theoretical underpinnings of his framework. Within 2 months, Synergy Solutions had signed contracts with 12 Fortune 500 companies, generating first-quarter revenue exceeding $8 million. Far beyond projections. By the 6-month mark, the subsidiary had a client roster of 37 companies across 4 continents and had already become profitable. Eduardo hired a team of cultural consultants, many drawn from academia like himself, brilliant minds who had struggled to find practical applications for their expertise in traditional business environments. He created a corporate culture that valued both intellectual rigor and practical implementation, bridging the gap between theory and business reality that had defined his own career journey. The 1-year anniversary of Eduardo's promotion to SVP brought another milestone. Daystar's annual report revealed record international growth, with revenues up 32% year over year. Project Synergy was specifically credited with securing 17 new major partnerships that had previously been considered unattainable due to cultural barriers. Synergy Solutions had generated $45 million in revenue, 50% above even Eduardo's optimistic projections. That evening, Alicia hosted a celebration at her penthouse apartment, inviting the executive team and board members. As champagne flowed and executives mingled, Eduardo found himself on the balcony, momentarily seeking a quiet moment to absorb how dramatically his life had changed in just 1 year. Quite a view, isn't it? James Hoffman joined him, offering a fresh glass of champagne. Breathtaking, Eduardo agreed, accepting the glass. The CFO leaned against the railing. I owe you an apology, Eduardo. I was skeptical of your framework. I questioned whether academic theories could deliver real business results. A reasonable concern for a CFO? Eduardo replied diplomatically. Perhaps. Hoffman swirled his champagne thoughtfully, but the numbers don't lie. Your work has transformed this company's global positioning more dramatically than any initiative in my 15 years here. The sincere acknowledgement from his former critic meant almost as much to Eduardo as Alicia's consistent support. Before he could respond, they were joined by Rajiv Mehta and several other executives. We were just talking about the Middle Eastern expansion, Rajiv said, his expression animated. The Saudi team closed the Al Faisal deal 3 weeks ahead of schedule. They credit your cultural alignment process entirely. Eduardo had spent 2 intensive weeks in Riyadh training the Saudi team. They did the hard work, he replied modestly. I just gave them the framework. Don't be so humble, another executive interjected. Your methodology is revolutionizing how we operate globally. As the conversation continued, Eduardo noticed Alicia watching from across the balcony, a satisfied expression on her face. She raised her glass in a subtle toast when their eyes met. Later, as the celebration wound down, she pulled him aside. Walk with me a moment. They moved to a quieter corner of the expansive penthouse. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights sparkled below them like a reflection of the night sky. I have something to show you, Alicia said, handing him a glossy business magazine. It was open to the annual Most influential business leaders list. There, ranked at number 28, was Eduardo's name alongside a professional photograph taken for Daystar's corporate website. "Congratulations," she said as he stared at the page in disbelief. "The article specifically cites your transformative approach to cross-cultural business communication and your journey from academic theorist to corporate strategist." Eduardo ran his finger over the page, reading the brief profile. It mentioned his academic background and his development of the cultural synchronization framework, but not his time as a janitor. That part of his story remained known only to those within Daystar. "I never expected anything like this," he said quietly. "I did," Alicia replied. "The moment you spoke up in that boardroom a year ago, I knew you were extraordinary." She paused, her expression turning more serious. "The board has been discussing the future of Synergy Solutions. Its growth has exceeded all projections, and it's quickly becoming more than just a subsidiary." Eduardo looked up from the magazine. "What are you suggesting?" "We're considering spinning it off as an independent company, with Daystar maintaining majority ownership, but with separate operations and leadership." Alicia watched his face carefully. "The board would like you to become CEO of the new entity." For the second time that evening, Eduardo found himself speechless. CEO. The title seemed impossible, even more improbable than his journey so far. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Alicia replied. "Take some time. This would be a significant change. More responsibility, more pressure, but also more autonomy to build something truly yours." As Eduardo drove home that night, his mind raced with possibilities. CEO of his own company, a company built on his ideas, his methodologies. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible when he'd been silently cleaning those same executives on offices. Lucia was waiting up despite the late hour, eager to hear about the celebration. "They want to make me CEO," he told her, still processing the news himself. Her squeal of excitement echoed through their apartment. "Dad, that's incredible. CEO of what?" He explained Alicia's proposal for spinning off Synergy Solutions. "It's not definite yet. There would be a lot to consider." "Like what?" Lucia demanded, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "This is everything you've worked for. It's a huge responsibility, Mia. Running an entire company is different from leading a division, and I'd be building something from the ground up, which you'd be amazing at," she insisted. "You rebuilt our entire lives from nothing. Creating a company would be easy by comparison." Her unwavering faith touched him deeply. "We'll see. I promised Alicia I'd think about it." That weekend, Eduardo took Lucia to visit Georgetown University, her top college choice. As they toured the campus, he watched his daughter's eyes light up at the possibilities before her. She would be applying to colleges in just a few months, potentially attending the following fall, if accepted. I could be a CEO with a daughter at Georgetown," he mused aloud as they sat on a bench in the university's historic quadrangle. Lucia grinned. "Pretty good for a former janitor and a scholarship kid from the wrong side of town." The next week, Eduardo met with Alicia to discuss the CEO offer in detail. The proposal was even more attractive than initially presented. He would have significant equity in the new company, a substantial salary increase, and considerable autonomy in building the organization while still benefiting from Daystar's resources and client network. "We'd want to announce the spin-off at the annual shareholders meeting next month," Alicia explained. "And it would be a major highlight, demonstrating Daystar's innovation and market leadership. I'd need to build a complete executive team," Eduardo noted, mentally listing the positions he'd need to fill. "You already have several key people working with you at Synergy Solutions who could transition to executive roles," Alicia pointed out, "and you'd have my full support in recruiting additional talent." Eduardo nodded. The path forward was becoming clearer. "I'll need a detailed prospectus for the new company, financials, growth projections," Alicia smiled. "That sounds like a yes." "It's a yes," Eduardo confirmed, the decision feeling right the moment he spoke it aloud. I want to build this. The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Eduardo worked closely with Daystar's legal and financial teams to structure the new company. He conducted confidential interviews with his current team, identifying those who would form the core leadership of the independent Synergy solution. As the shareholder meeting approached, Eduardo focused on his presentation. This would be his official introduction as CEO to Daystar's investors, a pivotal moment in establishing the new company's credibility. The night before the meeting, he practiced his speech for Lucia. She sat attentively on their living room sofa, offering occasional suggestions on delivery and emphasis. You need to tell your story, Dad, she said when he finished. Not the whole janitor to CEO thing if you're not comfortable with that, but at least the professor part. People connect with stories. Eduardo considered her advice. He had been reluctant to focus on his personal journey, preferring to emphasize the business strategy and market opportunity. But Lucia was right. His unique perspective was part of what made the Synergy approach valuable. The shareholder meeting was held in a grand ballroom at the city's finest hotel. Hundreds of investors, analysts, and media representatives filled the rows of chairs. Eduardo sat in the front row beside other Daystar executives, waiting for his moment. Alicia opened the meeting with a review of Daystar's record-breaking year, highlighting the dramatic international growth. Then she introduced the announcement that had been carefully kept under wraps. Today marks a significant evolution in Daystar's business strategy, she declared. We're announcing the creation of a new independent company, born from our groundbreaking Synergy Solutions subsidiary. The room buzzed with interest as Alicia outlined the spin-off plan, emphasizing the market opportunity and projected growth. Then she gestured toward Eduardo. Leading this new venture will be Dr. Eduardo Navarro, the visionary behind the cultural synchronization framework that has transformed Daystar's global operation. Please welcome the new CEO of Synergy International, Dr. Navarro. The applause as Eduardo approached the podium was polite but reserved. These were investors who cared about returns, not personalities. He adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath, Lucia's advice echoing in his mind. Good morning, he began. Before I outline the business strategy for Synergy International, I'd like to share a brief story about language and understanding. He spoke of his academic work, the years spent studying how language shapes perception and relationship building across cultures. He explained how his theoretical research found practical application in business contexts, creating bridges where barriers had previously existed. What we've discovered at Daystar is that successful global business isn't just about translating words correctly, though that is certainly important. A knowing smile played across his face, drawing a light chuckle from those familiar with the Zhang contract story. It's about translating intentions, expectations, and relationship dynamics. It's about creating true understanding across cultural boundaries. As Eduardo moved into the business presentation, detailing market analysis, competitive positioning, and growth projections, he could feel the energy in the room shifting. The investors were engaged, seeing not just numbers but a compelling vision. When Eduardo concluded his presentation, the applause was no longer merely polite, it was enthusiastic. Investors immediately raised hands for the Q&A session, eager to learn more about this new venture and its promising projections. The questions were incisive, as expected from sophisticated investors. How will you protect proprietary methodologies when consulting with competitors? What's the scalability model for entering new markets? How dependent is the framework on your personal expertise versus being systemically implemented? Eduardo addressed each question with clarity and confidence, demonstrating both his subject matter expertise and his growing business acumen. When asked about potential challenges, he was refreshingly candid about implementation hurdles and competitive pressures, while outlining robust strategies for addressing them. As the session concluded, Alicia returned to the podium. Thank you, Dr. Navarro. Ladies and gentlemen, Synergy International will begin operations as an independent entity next quarter. The prospectus with complete details is available through your investment advisors. We anticipate this spin-off will create significant value for Daystar shareholders, while establishing a new standard for global business communication. The rest of the meeting covered standard corporate matters, but the buzz throughout the room centered on the synergy announcement. Financial analysts could be seen huddled in corners, already adjusting valuation models and investment recommendations. At the reception afterward, Eduardo found himself surrounded by investors and board members, all eager to discuss the new company's potential. He navigated these conversations with growing ease, no longer the academic outsider, but a business leader confidently articulating his vision. Dr. Navarro, a distinguished older gentleman, approached, introducing himself as William Barrett, one of Daystar's largest individual shareholders. "Remarkable presentation. I'm particularly intrigued by your background. Linguistics to business strategy isn't a common path." "No, it isn't," Eduardo agreed, "but language and business are both fundamentally about connection and understanding. The principles translate surprisingly well." "Indeed," Barrett studied him with shrewd eyes. "I've been investing in technology companies for 40 years. The technical innovations are impressive, but it's the human element, how people communicate and build trust across boundaries, that ultimately determines success or failure. Your approach addresses a gap most companies don't even recognize exists." Eduardo appreciated the insightful observation. "That's precisely our advantage. We're solving problems that competitors don't yet understand." Barrett nodded thoughtfully. "Or I'll be increasing my position in Daystar before the spin-off, and I'll be watching Synergy International with great interest." Such conversations continued throughout the evening. By the time Eduardo finally headed home, he felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. The spin-off announcement had been more successful than anyone had anticipated, with early feedback from analysts overwhelmingly positive. Lucia was still awake when he arrived, despite the late hour. "Well, how did it go?" she demanded the moment he walked through the door. "Remarkably well," Eduardo replied, loosening his tie. The investors were very receptive. Several major shareholders specifically mentioned increasing their positions because of the synergy announcement. "I knew it," Lucia exclaimed. "I've been monitoring the financial news sites all evening. CNBC already has an article calling Synergy International the most anticipated corporate spin-off of the year, and predicting the stock will surge on opening day." Eduardo laughed. "When did you become such a financial expert?" "AP Economics," she replied with a grin. "I need to understand business if I'm going to be the daughter of a CEO." The following weeks were a blur of activity. Eduardo divided his time between winding down his responsibilities at Daystar and building the foundation for Synergy International. He secured prime office space in a downtown high-rise, recruited key executives from both within and outside Daystar, and finalized the operating structure for the new company. Each night, he returned home with his mind racing with decisions, plans, and strategies. Lucia became his sounding board, offering surprisingly insightful perspectives that often helped clarify his thinking. Their roles had subtly shifted, no longer just father and daughter, but something closer to mentor and protege, as Lucia's interest in business strategy grew. 1 month before the official launch of Synergy International, Eduardo received an unexpected invitation from Alicia. "The Metropolitan Museum is honoring major corporate donors this Saturday," she explained over the phone. "As Daystar's representative, I'm permitted to bring colleagues. I'd like you to join me." The event was the epitome of corporate high society, a black tie gala in the museum's grand hall, with attendees representing the elite of the business world. Eduardo, in a new tuxedo Lucia had insisted he purchase, felt surprisingly comfortable in these surroundings. A year of executive meetings, investor presentations, and strategic negotiations had given him a confidence that extended beyond business contexts into social ones. "Eduardo," Alicia greeted him at the entrance, elegant in a midnight blue evening gown. "I'm glad you could make it." As they moved through the glittering crowd, Alicia introduced him to CEOs, board chairs, and philanthropists from across the corporate spectrum. Eduardo was no longer the outsider looking in. He was now part of this world, exchanging business cards and discussing potential collaborations with leaders of global enterprises. During a quiet moment between introductions, Alicia led him to a relatively secluded alcove near a Renaissance sculpture. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," she said, her tone more personal than their usual business conversations. "What is it?" Eduardo asked, curious about her suddenly serious demeanor. "When Synergy International launches next month, there will naturally be significant media interest. Profiles, interviews, the standard publicity that accompanies any major corporate event." She paused. "They'll want your story, Eduardo, the full story." He tensed slightly. "You mean?" "Yes, the journey from night janitor to CEO." Alicia's gaze was direct but compassionate. "It's a remarkable narrative, one that would generate enormous positive publicity for both you and the company." Eduardo had anticipated this conversation, but still felt unprepared. His former role at Daystar wasn't a secret among the executive team, but it hadn't been publicly discussed either. The prospect of making it central to his professional narrative felt deeply uncomfortable. "I've never hidden my past," he said carefully, "but I've preferred to focus on my academic background and current work rather than the years you spent cleaning offices." Alicia finished gently. "I understand that completely, and to be clear, this is entirely your decision. If you prefer to keep that chapter private, I'll ensure our PR team directs all profiles toward your linguistic expertise and business accomplishments." Eduardo appreciated her sensitivity. "Thank you. I need to think about it." "Of course." Alicia smiled. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know something. That night when you spoke up in the boardroom, it wasn't just the contract you saved. You reminded me of something essential about leadership and talent. That brilliance doesn't only exist in executive suites or prestigious universities. Sometimes it's mopping the floors after everyone else has gone home." Her words stayed with Eduardo throughout the evening and followed him home. As he loosened his bow tie in the quiet of his apartment, he contemplated the decision before him. Should he embrace his unusual journey as part of his professional identity, or maintain the dignified narrative of the academic who transitioned to business leadership? "How was the gala?" Lucia asked the next morning over breakfast, eager for details about the glamorous event. "Enlightening," Eduardo replied. He explained Alicia's suggestion about including his janitorial background in the public narrative. Lucia considered this thoughtfully. "What are you thinking?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Part of me wants to focus solely on my academic credentials and business accomplishments, but another part recognizes the power of the complete story." Lucia took a thoughtful bite of her toast. "When I was 14, I used to be embarrassed when my friends found out you were a janitor," she admitted quietly. "I'd make excuses about why you couldn't come to school events, or I'd vaguely say you worked nights at a corporation. I was so stupid." "No, Mija." Eduardo reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You were a teenager navigating a complicated social world. Still," she continued, "I realize now what it actually meant, that you gave up everything, including your pride, to take care of me. That's not something to hide. It's something to honor." Her words struck him deeply. "What would you do in my position?" Lucia didn't hesitate. "I'd tell the whole story. Not just because it's inspiring, though it definitely is, but because it's authentic and because it shows something about Synergy's actual mission, seeing value where others don't, bridging divides, recognizing talent regardless of position or background." Eduardo considered this perspective. "The story isn't just about me, is it? It's about the larger principle." "Exactly." Lucia's eyes lit up. "Your whole framework is about authentic communication across boundaries. Wouldn't hiding part of your own journey contradict that?" Eduardo smiled at his daughter's wisdom. "When did you become so insightful?" "I had a good teacher," she replied with a grin. After breakfast, Eduardo called Alicia. "I've made my decision about the media narrative," he told her. "I want to be transparent about my complete journey, academic, janitor, and now CEO. But I'd like to frame it in the context of Synergy's mission, recognizing value across conventional boundaries." "Perfect," Alicia approved. "I'll have our PR team prepare a comprehensive media strategy with that narrative arc. And Eduardo, I think this is the right choice, not just for publicity, but for authenticity. The launch of Synergy International proceeded with extraordinary momentum. The financial press covered it extensively, with the Wall Street Journal running a front-page feature on the janitor who became CEO. The article detailed Eduardo's remarkable journey, emphasizing how his unique perspective had created a revolutionary approach to global business communication. Far from diminishing his credibility, Eduardo's background story enhanced it. Investors and potential clients were intrigued by the authenticity of his experience. The narrative perfectly embodied Synergy's core philosophy, that value and insight could come from unexpected sources, and that truly effective communication required looking beyond conventional assumptions. Synergy International's stock opened 40% above the projected price on its first day of trading. By market close, it had risen another 15%, making it one of the most successful spin-offs in recent corporate history. Eduardo, now a significant shareholder in his own company, found himself with a net worth that would have been unimaginable during his years pushing a mop through Daystar's corridors. The company's early months exceeded even the ambitious projections presented to investors. Major multinational corporations signed consulting contracts, eager to implement the methodology that had transformed Daystar's international operations. Eduardo assembled a world-class team of cultural consultants, linguists, and business strategists, creating a corporate culture that valued diverse perspectives and cross-disciplinary approaches. 6 months after launch, Synergy International opened offices in Singapore, Frankfurt, and São Paulo. 1 year in, the company had quadrupled its client base and doubled its initial valuation. Eduardo's vision had created not just a successful business, but a new paradigm for global commerce, one that recognized the profound impact of cultural understanding on business outcomes. Throughout this meteoric rise, Eduardo maintained a clear perspective on what mattered most. Despite his increasingly demanding schedule, he never missed Lucia's important school events. He established a scholarship fund at his former university for immigrant students facing financial hardships, and he created a special internship program at Synergy specifically designed for maintenance and service workers seeking professional advancement, people whose potential, like his own, might otherwise go unrecognized. As Synergy's second anniversary approached, Eduardo received a call from Forbes magazine. They were planning their annual Billionaires issue, and preliminary calculations suggested he would debut on the list. An extraordinary achievement for someone who, just 3 years earlier, had been emptying trash bins after hours. "They want to do a photo shoot at our apartment," he told Lucia that evening, still processing the surreal nature of the request. "Billionaire is a pretty good upgrade from Janitor," she teased, though her pride was evident. "Are you going to do it?" Eduardo hesitated. "It feels excessive, ostentatious." "Dad, your story inspires people. It shows what's possible." Lucia had matured remarkably during these transformative years. Now a freshman at Georgetown, she was pursuing a double major in international business and linguistics, inspired by her father's work. "Besides, think of all the good you can do with that platform," he nodded thoughtfully. "I'll consider it." The following week, Alicia invited Eduardo to lunch, something they did periodically to maintain the strong relationship between Daystar and Synergy International. They met at an upscale restaurant overlooking the city park, both now recognized enough by the business community that their entrance caused a subtle ripple of awareness among the other diners. "I hear Forbes is considering you for the billionaire list," Alicia remarked after they'd ordered. "Quite a milestone. If accurate, it's more a reflection of Synergy's success than any personal achievement," Eduardo replied. Alicia smiled. "Always modest, but you should be proud, Eduardo. What you've built is extraordinary, not just financially, but conceptually. You've created an entirely new approach to global business. With your initial support," he acknowledged, "if you hadn't recognized what I saw that night with the Zhang contract." "That's what leaders do," she said simply. "Recognize talent and potential, regardless of where it appears. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask you about something." Eduardo raised an eyebrow inquiringly. "And Daystar's board has been discussing succession planning," Alicia explained. "I've been CEO for 12 years, And while I'm not planning to leave immediately, we're beginning to consider future leadership. Your name has come up repeatedly in those conversations." Eduardo nearly choked on his water. "Me, as Daystar's CEO, but I'm running Synergy." "It wouldn't be immediate," Alicia clarified. "Perhaps in 2 to 3 years. By then, Synergy International will be fully established. You could transition to chairman while appointing a successor CEO from your leadership team." "I'm stunned," Eduardo admitted. "Returning to Daystar would be coming full circle in the most unexpected way." "Just something to consider," Alicia said. No pressure for an answer now. But the board is serious about the possibility. As Eduardo drove back to his office, he reflected on the extraordinary trajectory of his life, from distinguished academic to struggling immigrant to night janitor to CEO of his own company, and now potentially future CEO of Daystar itself. It was a journey he could never have imagined that night when he'd noticed the translation error in the Zhang contract. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Lucia. "Dad, have you seen the news? Synergy's stock just jumped 12% after that analyst report predicted you'll capture 30% of the global business communication consulting market by next year." Eduardo smiled at her enthusiasm. "That's wonderful news, Mija, but I'm actually thinking about something else right now." "What's that?" "The future," he replied, "and how sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the ones where we choose to speak up, even when it's frightening." That evening, Eduardo stood in his home office, gazing out at the city lights. On his desk was a small framed photograph, one of the few possessions he'd managed to keep through the difficult years. It showed him in his academic regalia on the day he received his doctorate, his wife beside him, both beaming with pride and optimism about the future. Beside it now sat a new frame containing his Daystar janitorial ID badge. He had kept it as a reminder of where he'd been, of the humility and perseverance that had carried him through the darkest period of his life. These two items, symbols of his highest academic achievement and his most humble professional role, represented the full spectrum of his journey. Eduardo picked up the janitorial badge, running his thumb over the plastic surface. This simple object had granted him access to the building where his life would change forever. It reminded him that sometimes opportunity appears in unexpected places, and that dignity isn't determined by title, but by character. Eduardo set the badge down and turned as he heard Lucia enter the apartment. She'd been spending most weeknights at Georgetown, but came home on weekends, maintaining their close bond despite her growing independence. "I brought dinner," she called, holding up bags of takeout from their favorite Spanish restaurant, a small luxury they now enjoyed regularly, but still appreciated as the special treat it once was. As they arranged the food on plates, Lucia studied her father. "Something's on your mind, I can tell." Eduardo smiled. His daughter had always been perceptive. "Alicia mentioned something interesting today. The Daystar board is considering me as her eventual successor." Lucia nearly dropped the container of paella. "Seriously, Dad? That's incredible. CEO of Daystar, the company where you used to clean floors. It's just preliminary discussions," he cautioned, "and it would be years away. But yes, the symmetry is remarkable. Would you do it?" Lucia asked, settling into her chair. "Leave Synergy to run Daystar?" Eduardo considered the question carefully. "I'm not sure. Synergy is my creation, built on my methodologies, shaped by my vision. Daystar is a much larger, more established company with diverse divisions and thousands of employees. But you transformed their international operations," Lucia pointed out, "and your approach to cross-cultural communication could reshape their entire corporate culture." "True." Eduardo served the paella, the familiar aroma bringing back memories of family meals in Madrid. "There's also the symbolic aspect. A former night janitor becoming CEO of the company would send a powerful message about recognizing talent and potential at all levels." Lucia nodded enthusiastically. "It would be the ultimate validation of everything Synergy stands for, seeing value where others don't, bridging divides, authentic communication across boundaries." They ate in contemplative silence for a moment, both considering the implications. Then Lucia spoke again. "Remember that night when you found the contract error?" "Of course," Eduardo replied. It changed everything. You could have stayed silent, she observed, kept cleaning, gone home, continued our struggling but stable life. It was risky to speak up. Not speaking up would have been the greater risk, Eduardo replied. Not to me personally, but to my integrity, to who I am. I couldn't see something so critically wrong and remain silent, regardless of my position. Lucia smiled. And that's exactly why you should consider the Daystar position. They need someone who sees integrity as non-negotiable, regardless of circumstances. 3 days later, Eduardo arrived at Synergy International's headquarters for a routine leadership meeting. The company now occupied 3 floors of a prestigious downtown building with over 200 employees worldwide and a client roster that included more than half of the Fortune 100. The executive team waited in the boardroom. Brilliant minds Eduardo had personally recruited from academia, consulting, and global business. Many, like himself, had unconventional backgrounds that brought unique perspectives to their work. Before we begin today's agenda, Eduardo announced, I'd like to share some personal news. Daystar's board has initiated preliminary discussions about my potentially succeeding Alicia Montero as CEO in the coming years. Surprise rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of congratulation. I haven't made any decisions, Eduardo clarified, and any transition would be years away. But I wanted to be transparent with all of you about this possibility. His chief operating officer, Maya Chen, spoke first. It would be a significant loss for Synergy, but an understandable next step in your journey. If I were to consider this path, Eduardo replied, I would need complete confidence in Synergy's continued success under new leadership. He looked meaningfully around the table at the executive team he had assembled. The meeting proceeded with normal business matters, but the Daystar possibility lingered in everyone's minds. Afterward, Maya remained behind to speak with Eduardo privately. You're seriously considering it, aren't you? She asked. Eduardo nodded. It would be a different kind of challenge, and there's something compelling about completing the circle, returning to where everything changed, but in a completely transformed role. Maya smiled. When you hired me, you told me about your journey, from professor to janitor to CEO. You said something I've never forgotten, that true leadership comes from understanding both the view from the top and the view from the bottom. I believe that more than ever, Eduardo affirmed, then perhaps leading Daystar is exactly where your journey should take you next, Maya suggested. And perhaps my journey should include stepping up here at Synergy when the time comes. Eduardo studied his COO thoughtfully. He had recruited Maya from a prestigious consulting firm, impressed by her brilliant mind and exceptional cross-cultural insights. Over the past 2 years, she had proven herself indispensable, often anticipating his strategic decisions before he articulated them. You would be the natural successor, he acknowledged. But that's a conversation for another day. No decisions have been made. That evening, Eduardo received a call from William Barrett, the Daystar shareholder he'd met at the museum gala 2 years earlier. Dr. Navarro, Barrett greeted him warmly. I understand. There have been some interesting discussions about your future. Eduardo was momentarily taken aback. News travels fast in business circles. Indeed it does, Barrett chuckled, particularly when it involves someone whose story has become something of a business legend. The janitor who saved $100 million and transformed global corporate communication, a simplification, but not entirely inaccurate, Eduardo acknowledged. I'm calling because I've significantly increased my position in both Daystar and Synergy International over the past 2 years, Barrett explained. Your work at both companies has created extraordinary value. As a major shareholder in both, I want you to know you have my full support for whatever path you choose. I appreciate that, Eduardo replied, recognizing the significance of Barrett's endorsement. As one of Daystar's largest individual investors, his support would carry substantial weight with the board. May I offer one observation? Barrett asked. And of course, the business world is full of talented executives who can run successful companies, Barrett said thoughtfully. But transformational leaders, those who fundamentally change how business is conducted, are exceedingly rare. You've proven yourself to be the latter. Whatever role allows you to continue that transformation most effectively is where you'll create the greatest value. After the call, Eduardo stood at his window, contemplating Barrett's words. The city sprawled before him, lights twinkling in office buildings where countless decisions were made daily, some wise, some foolish, many constrained by conventional thinking and cultural blindness. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "Dinner tomorrow night. Bringing my linguistics professor. She's a huge fan of your work and doesn't believe I'm actually your daughter." Eduardo smiled, texting back his agreement. From struggling single father to academic reference, another unexpected turn in their journey together. 2 weeks later, Harvard Business Review published a case study on Synergy International, analyzing how Eduardo's cultural synchronization framework had revolutionized global business communication. The article concluded with a provocative question: could Navarro's methodologies transform not just international business dealings, but corporate culture itself? If so, his impact may ultimately extend far beyond the already substantial financial results, potentially reshaping how organizations recognize and develop talent at all levels. Eduardo read the article in his office, reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed in just 3 years. From invisibly cleaning executive offices to being featured in Harvard Business Review, a journey no rational person could have predicted. His phone rang. Alicia Montero. "Have you seen the article?" she asked without preamble. "I'm reading it now," he replied. "The board is meeting next week to discuss succession planning more formally," she informed him. "They'd like you to attend to explore the possibility in greater depth." Eduardo took a deep breath. "I'll be there." "You're actually considering it, aren't you?" Alicia sounded pleased but slightly surprised. "Yes," Eduardo confirmed, "but not for the reasons people might assume. Not for the prestige or compensation." "Then why?" Eduardo thought of the night janitors currently working throughout Daystar's building, invisible people with unknown talents and untold stories. He thought of his own journey and the extraordinary chain of events set in motion by one moment of courage. "Because sometimes," he said quietly, "the most important perspective comes from unexpected places. And sometimes the person mopping the floor can see things that everyone else has missed." As he hung up, Eduardo's gaze fell on a framed photograph recently added to his collection. Lucia at her Georgetown orientation, her expression bright with possibility. Beside it sat a small, framed piece of paper, the simple check stub from his first night as a janitor at Daystar, preserved as a reminder of beginnings and perseverance. From that humble starting point to the precipice of becoming CEO, it was a journey that defied conventional narrative. Yet, in its unexpectedness, lay its power. Every step, from distinguished professor to struggling immigrant to night janitor to visionary business leader, had shaped his unique perspective. Eduardo picked up the janitorial badge one more time, turning it over in his hand. Then he placed it carefully in his briefcase. Tomorrow, he would take it to the board meeting, not as a prop for an inspirational story, but as a tangible reminder of a fundamental truth he had lived: that wisdom, insight, and transformative ideas can come from anywhere if only we have the courage to listen. And sometimes the most revolutionary insights come from the person everyone else has overlooked, the one quietly cleaning the room after everyone else has gone home.